Good morning, my friends. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can be with you forever. I'm going to be leaving my email in the description, so if you want to email me for anything at all, feel free to do so. So today, it's been a while since I've done one of these videos. I've been kind of off the grid. Well, it's been a while since I was traveling, but I kind of just haven't really put time into doing any of these videos. I've been focusing on other things. And so I decided to get back into it for the moment at least, because I want to talk about a subject that I think is pretty pertinent in terms of the viral material that is currently out there, specifically relating to certain internet phenomenon celebrities that are sort of espousing this kind of toxic masculinity narrative, this kind of bullshit fake machismo warrior mentality that's really not even based in anything, virtuous or honorable in any capacity. It's mostly just about like how much money you can make selling bullshit and then spending all of that money on like cars and pretty much bribing women to have sex with you, which is like the extent of a lot of these. I'm not even going to mention their names because it's not even important, and I'm sure you already know who these people are. But these people that like hang around with lots of these hot girls that are basically paid for to hang out with them so they can live these very fake and materialistic lifestyles that just involve kind of flaunting your wealth, so to speak. I wouldn't even call it wealth because wealth is a very valuable thing to attain in life. It's mostly just being rich. Wealth is more of a all-encompassing principle, right? You can call someone who has a family and a career they love or a job they love, or someone who just has meaningful income in the sense that they spend their money on meaningful things in their lives, and that's sort of more of an abundance of wealth rather than just having a shit ton of money to spend on pointless transient things that don't really bring value to your life, which is just being rich. But that's beside the point, because I want to talk about the true aspects in terms of masculinity, right? There's this notion of chivalry, that chivalry has been dead for quite some time, specifically because ever since we've delved into a sexually liberated environment where men and women are, equal in the sense that they are obliged to carry themselves as they see fit. That's essentially what the equality argument is in favor of. There's a lot of problems with that, not because of the fact that women have rights or whatnot, because that was really the whole point of, feminism in general, was that women had sovereignty and rights to do what they want in a society without them being imposed. Most of this had to do with voting or, having a bank account or being able to have an abortion if they wanted to. And those are subjects that I'm not really going to get into because it's not really the subject I'm talking about, because there's a different aspect of something that was liberated, which is the sexual liberation movement of the 60s and 70s, which was sort of geared in tandem with these kind of much more legal aspects of liberation, which was more to do with something that was actually a lot more pragmatic than anything, but the actual cultural incentives and sort of holding yourself to a high standard in terms of having respect for your sovereignty and your soul have kind of been thrown out the window since the 1970s with the so-called sexual liberation movement, and that's pretty much the main reason why you see a huge number of rape cases pretty much incrementally increasing since that era of time, specifically because it eliminated the need for men to hold themselves to any sort of higher standard or chivalrous mentality, specifically because they're liberated now. There's a sexual liberation. You can do whatever you want. So if you want to grab some girl's ass at a club, you can do that now, whereas before in the 1950s that would have been very inappropriate, especially as a man. A man would not be considered a man if he would just be promiscuous with women in that regard. But since the 1960s and 70s, with rock and roll culture that pretty much just went out the window in favor of sexual liberation and doing whatever you want. Part of that also included in the 60s a liberation of pedophilia, which didn't really take off, thankfully, but that was there. That was like a real thing that a lot of these sexual liberators actually wanted, that age is just a number kind of thing, which we obviously know is not exactly a healthy mindset, to take into mind when dating people, especially if they're very young, very much younger than you. So to go off on that, we see this resurgence of toxic masculinity in the sense of not in an honorable sense, but more of a sense of like revenge almost against feminism, which has turned into this dogmatic kind of anti-men rhetoric that a lot of men have appropriated for themselves, which has become more of a problem, especially towards the younger generation who are witnessing this sort of emasculation of men and how they are reacting to that and responding to that as they reach adolescence. And that's why we see a lot of teenage boys are starting to gravitate towards these online male role models who just espouse this very brutal, base, uncivilized, barbarian mentality of masculinity, because they're contrasting themselves against this sort of anti-masculine, anti-whatever rhetoric that's kind of been pervasive in society. One of the main things is, I've noticed this and I've experienced this ever since I was a kid, is the casual reflection that women are superior to men, right? This is something that a lot of like woke, liberal-minded baby boomers like to espouse in a kind of like tongue-in-cheek kind of way, where they try to humble themselves by pointing out that like, oh, men are just so stupid. Women are so much more superior and intelligent to men in every single way, blah, blah, blah. It's like this, like they're trying to pander to women as a means to sort of, espouse some sense of honor. But really all you're doing, especially when you're teaching this to young kids, because I've like witnessed this as a young child, maybe since I was like 5 years old, and I've heard this repeatedly from both men and women who say this like seriously to young boys. Men are inferior to women, and not only that, but you see this in media, in commercials. And so when you see these boys grow up as adolescents, well, you see two sides of men. You see one side who are completely open to this idea, and they become extremely emasculated. They become extremely dependent on women. They become needy and just sort of self-destructive in a way of emasculating themselves and believing that anything that's inherently masculine or testosterone driven inside of them is an evil that needs to be eradicated. And they become just very whiny and useless men that don't really add value to anyone in any particular way. And it's actually very sad to see that. And I've seen that a lot from people who've changed in a very negative way to become just very pointless men. And they just kind of are very robotic in their countenance. And then you have the other opposite of extremes, where you have these men that are very reactionary to the feminization of generalized culture, especially in the West, and they become extremely toxic and basically just rape women whenever they want. There's no other way to sort of hold back on that kind of description, but that is what happens, and a lot of these men gravitate towards those feelings, and there's no real consensus of actual masculine chivalry. And the reason why chivalry exists is because of the fact that men are, I don't want to say superior to women, but they are on another level of just vitality, I would say. They have a lot more energy than women in a very intensified way. If you notice, especially in high intensive workplaces, you will find that women are more likely to experience burnout and fatigue and anxiety and depression. And that's mostly a hormonal thing, right? They don't have as much testosterone as men, and men have a lot more. And so with this testosterone, it gives you power in a sense where you can become more focused, more driven. It doesn't mean you're better than the women. It just means you have a lot more energy to commit to what you're doing. And so women can tap into that as well, not necessarily through testosterone, although they can accumulate that slightly if they exercise more or, eat healthy or whatever. And, there's that whole argument about microplastics affecting testosterone, but that's a whole other discussion I won't get into. But the main point is that men have this, innate testosterone that needs to be controlled. I don't think it needs to be eliminated. And that's pretty much what the prerogative of, the fake enlightened boomer who believes that masculinity is evil and femininity is the way forward and progressive, and women are just so much better and more well thought out than men, and men are just stupid and blah blah blah. That's pretty much been their main talking point for since the 90s. And you're now seeing a generation of men who have come of age, who have been digesting that for their entire lives, and it's starting to reflect itself in society in one way or another. And this is something that needs to be addressed and can't just be ignored, and can't just be reactionarily opposed in the way we've been going about things with the anti-masculinity prerogative that's kind of pervasive amongst a lot of people who claim to be, good people, whatever that means. So you have to deal with it through chivalry. And I got into a conversation with someone who said that chivalry can exist for both men and women. Women can easily be chivalrous as well. And it's like, yeah, sure. But at the end of the day, a man is just physically stronger than a woman on average. Obviously, there are some women who, for whatever reason, they've, learned martial arts, or they started lifting a ton of weights and they just became stronger than men. But generally, they're in the vast minority of women. And in reality, women are threatened by men who evoke a sense of, just threat. They're just threatening because they don't have a system in place. They don't have a spiritual system. They don't have an aspect of controlling themselves or holding themselves to a higher virtue, because men are just inferior to women, right? That's the whole thing. So when you say that to young kids and you espouse that in the media, you're going to get a reaction out of that. You're going to create a generation of young boys who are going to espouse that in whatever way it comes out, right? It's either going to be a bunch of men who are completely emasculated and just completely useless in regard to their biology, or you're going to have a bunch of men that are completely unbridled and uncontrolled in their actions and completely disrespectful towards the opposite sex. So when we talk about chivalry, what we are talking about is holding yourself accountable to the power that you possess as a man over women. And this is specifically a physical power that you need to hold yourself accountable to and you need to be aware of. And that sort of holds you in a virtuous state. And even though it's very difficult as a man nowadays to actually date and find women to be partnered with, much more difficult than it was in the 1970s, where everything was liberated and you can pretty much do whatever you want. You can't really do that nowadays. Whether you or not you believe if that's correct morally, it doesn't change the fact that you need to hold yourself to a higher standard in terms of respecting women in that way. It doesn't mean putting yourself underneath them in a way that makes you feel inferior in any capacity, but it makes you aware of the circumstances of what you are capable of. And I don't think men don't realize what they are capable of, and I don't think women are aware of what they have done, or what kind of power they hold in generalized society, that we do not live in the 1950s anymore. Times have changed a lot, and the women have a lot more power and authority in places like in corporations and in government. Government not so much. That's still very male dominated, but especially in the corporate world, just from personally seeing it in the artistic world especially. Women hold a lot more power and control of who they want to be involved in this. And a lot of it comes down to being afraid of masculinity and sort of wanting to cut it out. And they sort of favor men who are more emasculated for this purpose because they're afraid of men who are just physically strong looking. Even it's a very like materialistic kind of impression, but I've definitely witnessed it and have been subjected to it. And there's no reason to victimize yourself. I don't believe in that as a virtue at all, but it is something to be aware of as a man or as a woman. And what it means to be chivalrous as a man is to respect your own physical sovereignty in relation to women, and holding yourself accountable in that context. And that means controlling yourself in a sexual manner so that it's not just sexual liberation and you can do whatever you want. You actually hold yourself to a position of higher authority. And what that higher authority is God ultimately. And the reason why we're seeing a lot of these toxic masculinity bullshit things is because most men don't adhere themselves towards honorable or virtuous conduct, because we've eliminated the need for religion and God and everything else. And so that's why we are seeing men who are completely lost and unfounded, and we are seeing women who are completely lost and completely unguided in any principles. And we're sort of seeing more and more of a divide in the gender sphere of things, because men, in my context as a man, we are not raised in a manner to be virtuous or honorable or feel like we have purpose as men. We feel like we are purposeless, because that is the general notion that we are taught, that men are worthless, and we need to be reminded of that so that women can take power and control things in the world. That's pretty much what, whether you want to call it the agenda or the elite, I don't really consider that, because this is happening just from normal people in normal life. This isn't an elite top-down procedure. This is just something that you witness amongst normal people who believe these things full-heartedly, that men are inferior to women. And it's a very weird thing for me, because I don't partake in those kinds of beliefs. I sort of take everyone at face value, and I see, in terms of the gender differences, that each gender has their strengths and their weaknesses, and they just kind of have to work with them and then, exalt themselves in any way that they can. There's no need to prioritize one gender or the other, or prioritize a hormonal concept over another. It's just kind of silly. So I'm going to leave it at that. I just wanted to sort of touch upon that subject. It's very pressing in these confused masculine times, I would say, that men need to sort of start holding themselves to a higher virtuous standard. And through that, they become more magnanimous, because you're not humbling yourself in a state of saying women are superior to men. You're humbling yourself in the context of who you are as a person. You're humbling yourself to your highest potential as a person. That's really what ultimately you're going towards, which is being humble towards God, not being humble towards, women in a generalized context. It just doesn't really make sense. You humble yourself in the context of women so that, first of all, they are safe, but it also, makes women trust men even more so, because that's also a problem. That's why it's so difficult to date as a man, because most women just won't trust you because of what men have done to them in the past. And most men aren't even aware of it, because they don't see it. It's not in their consciousness at all times until they actually, maybe they get a partner somehow, they get a girlfriend, or they're friends with women somehow, and they actually witness the depravity that a lot of men uphold themselves to, and the pathetic actions they take to pursue sex, because that's ultimately societally what we've pretty much espoused into the younger generation, that your only worth is raping women. That's pretty much what men are taught, that they're stupid and they're inferior. And it's the same thing that we did with women in the 1950s when we had all these commercials and all this media portraying women as dumb and useless. And then what did you get from that? You got this radical feminist movement in the 1960s. You got things like the Scum Manifesto. You had women just being generally unhappy and hating men, which is not an ideal scenario, but it was a general reaction to how women were portrayed in media and how women were repressed legally in a lot of senses. And now you're seeing this in society towards men, where men are sort of conditioned to believe that they are inferior and stupid, and that's how they're going to act in society. That's why women in the 1950s did act stupid and shallow and weak and pathetic, because that's what they were conditioned to believe. And now we are seeing the same thing with men. Men are conditioned to believe that they're stupid and act on impulse and are abusive towards women and are stupid, blah, blah, blah. And that's what we are seeing men condition themselves into becoming as they grow older. And so that's obviously a problem, because we don't want to have useless men. We want to have men in the world who are accomplishing to their highest potential. And having the highest potential is, one, acknowledging that you are a man and you can utilize your masculinity to benefit the world. It's not just this bland, monolithic evil that exists as masculinity and you need to eradicate it. That's completely nonsensical. It's more of a, how should I put it? You're holding together yourself in a way and controlling yourself to attain a higher purpose, and you're utilizing, your animalistic based self to channel that into a higher purpose. And it's the same thing for women. Women have a lot of deficiencies of their own and a lot of problems that are rooted in their biology, just like men do. And this is something that's completely not talked about, because women are afraid that if we go down that road, they'll be subjugated again like they were in prior generations, because we don't want to put people down in any capacity. But this aspect in schools and society that women are these kind of perfect static beings, and they have so much potential and they're so good and noble, blah blah blah, it's creating a mentality of superiority and superiority complexes and a lot of entitlement issues that I've noticed from a lot of women who sort of espouse this victim mentality while also maintaining this very, very high sense of entitlement towards anything in life. And they think that they deserve things because of the fact they are women, because they are brought up to believe that they are superior to men, even though that's obviously not true. Everyone's has the capacity for anything, regardless of their gender. And a lot of the times, you're just not going to be as good as someone else, whether they are a man or a woman. And you can't just be conditioned to believe that you will be better than them just because, some commercial or some movie or, your high school teacher told you that men are stupid and inferior to women. And you see that mentality carried on in life, where people just have these entitlement issues. And the same thing for men. Men have had these entitlement issues long before this current era. So it's not a one-way street, so to speak. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to like and subscribe. And I'll see you next time. Peace.